Hey guys, how we doing? So we're back on another Annie News video. I wanted to do this while I had no laptop. I love these Annie News videos, especially when it's explaining and then... Oh god, it'd be so cool to see how strong is Shalltear were. There is a cut content of Goblin Slayer out at the moment, so what I'll do is, if it comes to me recording an Annie News video and there isn't any Overlord stuff out yet, I'll record the cut content. Otherwise, if how strong is Shalltear comes out, I'll do that. But until then, let's get into this. Who is Shalltear BloodFallen? I'm excited for this. She's a lolly into the
Shalltear BloodFallen.
Yeah!
Bloody Valkyrie.
She's so cool.
And best chair. I hope you're ready for a long one, because she's definitely got a lot to her.
Cool.
First, a quick
The
look at the
Succubate
page.
t-shirts.
Now let's do as we usually do, and find out who is Shalltear.
Who is she?
Let's begin. Shalltear is the floor guardian of the first, second, and third floors of Nazarick, which essentially in their own right comprise one big floor known as the Catacombs. It's a labyrinth filled with all manners of traps and tricks, designed to wear down, delay, or destroy an enemy invading force. And Shalltear's job was to be the first line of defense against any intruders who made it through all of that.
You're such a badass.
As a matter of fact, when dealing with lone intruders, Momonga would typically show up to personally take them out, and he would bring Shalltear for protection and support.
Cool.
So the pair of them have a fairly long history of cooperation together.
That's awesome.
You might say then that Shalltear's job was to be a shock trooper, Ainz's personal
Just to
bodyguard,
be there.
and an expert skirmisher. A backstory on her would have been something nice to start off with, but her creator didn't seem to come up with anything particularly detailed.
Oh.
Or even have much in the way of a clearly defined role or job in the broader scheme of Nazarick. As we will soon see, he had a couple very specific and conspicuous areas of interest during her creation.
Right.
In any case,
Oh, dear.
let's start with the basics. Shalltear is, of course, a vampire.
Yep.
A fictional race of undead monsters with supernatural speed and strength. It's only fitting that the guardian of the catacombs be a supremely powerful undead. Vampires are a classic gothic horror monster. Their history dates way back to 18th century folklore, involving rumors and superstitions about corpses and their decomposition process.
I want to suck
the blood bore little resemblance to the modern versions. It was actually Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, which would go on to provide the basis for the modern vampire genre.
Dracula Untold was a good movie.
And powers, though the myths would still continue to develop through over a century
This
of
is
fiction
Castlevania.
writings.
I still need to watch
For
this.
instance, powerful vampires can create lesser vampires, and these lesser vampires essentially become thralls to the greater vampires who created them. They become loyal servants who can't disobey their master. Often, their old personality and sense of morality disappear entirely, and they become the same breed of evil, sinister creature as that which created them. Though in other cases, the lesser vampires could retain their individuality and personality, despite still being bound to serve the will of their master. Shalltear BloodFallen's name sounds quite fitting for a vampire, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I do.
But it doesn't seem like it was based on anything specific.
BloodFallen.
Sort of like it was just plucked out of thin air. BloodFallen, or Fallen Blood, is probably a reference to her vampire race. Fallen is a euphemism for death, and vampires are well known as drinkers of blood. Shalltear, on the other hand, is a little less obvious. However, the full name itself would fit right at home with names of other iconic Japanese vampire girls, like Remilia Scarlet from the Toho franchise. In fact, Shalltear shares a lot of thematic similarities with the Toho vampire girls.
Oh, wow.
The primary theme of Shalltear BloodFallen's design is the cross between a young, childlike and innocent little girl with a vicious, dangerous, predatory vampire.
Yeah.
But can something really be cute and innocent, but also predatory, dangerous,
Yeah,
and
it's a bit of an
downright
odd one, isn't it?
Shows like Toho and Overlord seek to explore this dynamic, bringing us back to
I think it
our
adds to
recurring
it.
Gap Moe theme, a common element throughout not only Overlord, but Japan in general. At its essence, it's when a particular thing is expected to be one way, but then embodies something completely conflictive or opposite. For Shalltear, you can see this paradoxical duality in something as simple as her visual design. Her appearance is that of a goth lolly. Basically, pale complexion and Victorian-era clothes on a little girl.
At first glance you'd think, oh okay, no harm, no foul, and then, eat your face.
Early 2000s in Japan. The look is reminiscent of something that you might find on an old Victorian-era doll. It's seen as dark and exotic, but also cute. The doll-like qualities and cute, frilly dress make one look disarming and innocent. but the clothing being a deep, dark color creates a haunting beauty and hints at something more sinister. This style of clothing fits a young female vampire especially well, and is quite common in Toho since
I'm
it
liking these
reinforces the
designs.
Gap Moe motif. Her personality also maintains this duality. On the one hand, she's a haughty, sadistic dominatrix who lords over others, one who delights in abusing her power and inflicting suffering on her underlings, or anyone else that falls into her clutches. On the other hand, she's got an element of the irresponsible, helpless, adorable little sibling.
Well, yeah, as soon as they got her
One
back,
that
she's
is
like,
always
oh, I
getting into trouble or
failed.
making mistakes. But
Gonna get drunk
in a
at the
way,
pub.
that's what makes her so amusing and endearing. Both these aspects of her personality come from her creator, Peroronchino. The first was the way he designed her to be, and the second was something that he may not have intended to actually happen, but
Oh.
which may have happened anyway because of the mechanics governing how the NPCs gained life. I say may because it's hard to really know for sure what was going on in his head.
Right.
In any case, there are three main determinants of an NPC's personality. The first and most important is the information written about them
The
in their
flavor
biographies by
text.
their creator. The second are their innate gameplay features like
Okay.
karma, race, and class. And lastly, they also adopt subtle elements of the
Their
personality
creator,
of
yeah,
their
yeah.
creator, particularly in the ways that weren't strongly specified by their biography and lore or their gameplay features. In Shalltear's case, the bulk of her personality comes from her lore and background, though it's not unlikely that she adopted some of Peroronchino's personality as well. But in order to determine the validity of that statement, we first need to see what kind of person he was.
Yeah, what was he
as
like?
well as what his intentions were with Shalltear. To be honest, this guy was kind of a degenerate, and by that, I mean he had a lot of weird fetishes.
Oh.
He's the type of guy to join an online community, and instead of interactive conversation with people, he'd be the one to post 90% of the content in the NSFW channel.
Right.
Suffice to say, he had a pretty massive collection of, let's say, not safe for work stuff. For the most part, he kept his weird tastes to himself, only sharing it with a small group of other individual guildmates, who were pretty chill and didn't mind it too much.
Right, they're just like,
One of
okay,
which
you're into
was
that dude,
Malone,
whatever.
Though sometimes he'd get a little too excited, and let his darker tastes slip out in the company of others. Of course, Peroronchino wouldn't even notice, and he'd just continue to prattle on about whatever weird stuff that he was talking about.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, when the opportunity to design an NPC arose, Peroronchino used it to provide an outlet for all of his biggest fetishes. And as usual, I'm going to be explaining each of them in exhaustive, overanalyzed detail. So if you're not someone who's comfortable with this type of conversation, then you might want to skip this part.
Let's see where we go
I tried my
here.
best to really tone it down heavily from what was stated in the source material.
Okay.
But let's get to it.
Let's see.
Shalltear is the embodiment of the word fetish. Not only does she have many herself, her appearance and character is also designed to appeal to a specific variety as well.
Right.
She's meant to have that sexual allure to her. Peroronchino made sure that on top of her goth lolly outfit, she also had a wide selection of dresses, nurse uniforms, maid outfits.
So that makes
bodysuits,
sense why she had to
swimsuits,
dress
and
in
so
that.
on.
Oh god,
Though,
really?
unfortunately for us, we never really get to see them. Even her dialect was designed in a way to be seductive. She speaks in a form of Japanese that is stereotypically associated with high-class courtesans or
Alright.
prostitutes from the Japanese
Okay.
feudal age, and is meant to evoke a subtle seductiveness. So, whereas Peroronchino attempted to suppress his darker desires, he made sure that Shalltear could be very open with them. Her every act is designed to exude a degree of sexuality. Of course, this stands in contrast to her body, which is immature and childlike,
That's weird.
implying Peroronchino's interest in lollies.
Ugh.
The popularity of lollies, a bit of a weird thing in Japan,
Yep.
but supposedly it ties into the broader concept of moe. Basically, the rationale is that small cute things evoke feelings of brotherly love, adoration, and protective instincts.
Fate.
And of course, when people like something, some are probably going to fetishize it.
Yeah.
This is taken a step further with Shalltear, where she pretends to have a mature figure, despite having the body of a child. It's often said that a woman showing just a little bit of skin is more appealing than showing lots of it. The hint itself could be more alluring and attractive than the actual thing. Perhaps there's something similar going on here with Shalltear, with how she pretends not to be flat-chested, but when getting called out on it, she gets all embarrassed and flustered.
Yes. How dare you?
It wouldn't surprise me at all if Peroronchino's goal with this was to provide a subtle hint at her childlike qualities. there is at least some part of her design that is meant to evoke childlike innocence. After all, it does accentuate the gap moe as well, since it enhances the contrast between her dangerous evil vampire side and her innocent childlike side. As for her own fetishes now, as much as you may think that they aren't a necessity to explaining Shalltear herself, they are in fact some of the most important aspects of her character.
Okay.
After all, if her entire personality is based on them, then they'll completely define how she interacts with others.
Makes sense.
And while we don't have her character
I like that
bio
design,
to
that was
reference,
cool, that.
we do know that she's demonstrated an arousal in a wide variety of different things, from a range of bodily fluids to necrophilia? I mean, vampires tend to have underling vampires.
Yeah.
So Pararoncino made sure she had a harem of pretty vampire ladies to sleep with. And vampires are technically undead, so that classifies it as necrophilia, right?
Right.
It's possible he just wrote Shalltear to have every fetish that he could think of, or just a bunch of different
Kind of
random
weird.
ones. But of all of them, she seems to have two main interests: other women and eyes. Normally, though, she just comes across as someone who is attracted to other women, primarily undead, though she has no problem with the living either, and would just as easily settle for men. Anyway, Shalltear's fundamental nature is that of a sadist. She enjoys abusing and torturing women in less than humane ways. Shalltear is a quintessential dominatrix who asserts her authority over others, turning them into her submissive slaves. It's heavily implied through this that Shalltear is a big fan of BDSM.
Right.
If you don't know what that means, you can Google it. Just don't do it at school or at work. She takes every aspect of that acronym and applies it to their fullest extent. Now, the word abuse can be thrown around rather loosely to mean treating someone else poorly. But what Shalltear does fits the strictest and most traditional meaning of the term. A method by which the abuser trains the abusee, warping and distorting their personality and psychology in order to serve the whims of the abuser. An abuser typically uses some of the classic techniques of operant conditioning, most often punishment. Basically, they punish undesired behavior with pain, suffering, and other negative outcomes. These terms are the product of a rather famous set of psychology experiments in the early 1930s, done by a man named B.F. Skinner, the most famous of which is probably the Skinner's box. A set of mice are placed inside a cage, and a lever is placed inside the box, which produces different effects. If the effects are positive, the mice quickly learn to press that lever often. When the effects are negative, the mice just as quickly learn to avoid that lever entirely. It was later shown that this effect could be replicated rather easily in dogs, humans, and other animals. Which now brings us to how it's relevant to explain Shalltear's abuse. Often, a victim of abuse is helpless to fight back, so they subconsciously adopt behaviors that make it less likely for the abuser to want to try and hurt them.
Right.
The thing about this is that even the abuser is acting out of the subconscious desire to have power and control, meaning both individuals are undergoing operant conditioning. The abuser is rewarded with compliance, and the victim does whatever they can to avoid being abused. It becomes a process of learning that is entirely habitual and subconscious. What makes abuse actual abuse is not the harm itself, but the fact that the process causes some pretty insidious long-term changes in the psychology of the victim, as the habits of avoiding abuse become ingrained in their personality permanently. Shalltear is a perfect example of this classical form of abuser. I've already mentioned this, but she has a selection of high-level minions called vampire brides, and they're subjected to all types of abuse from Shalltear. She molds them, as well as any other woman who catches her interest, into perfectly obedient servants. For one of her underlings to displease her in any way might mean she spends the night, or indeed several weeks, making its every waking moment a living hell.
Oh God.
And as a level 100 NPC, she's able to do whatever she wants by force. She will often shame or degrade them too, almost as often as she subjects them to pain and suffering. The only thing they can do to avoid this is to try your best to avoid displeasing her. It's after a few weeks or months that any victim would become an obedient slave who learns to pick up on the subtle cues of her mood and temperament in order to always keep her happy. Though the problem for them is that Shalltear is capricious and a bit quick to anger. Since she is a sadist who actually enjoys causing suffering, she may just choose to do so on a whim, for seemingly no reason at all. Her minions don't just learn to not displease her, they learn to become passive, docile, and
Just
obedient.
let it happen.
If they can't avoid taking her off, or if she's just going to randomly abuse someone, then at least they could avoid attracting her attention. If they stand out in any way or show any kind of individuality, they attract her notice, and thus she may decide to take out her frustrations on them. Through this, she breaks their spirit down and stamps out their personality and ego.
Oh my god.
In the end, the only thing that they should be concerned with is how best to serve Shalltear, and eventually, that is the only thing they end up thinking about. But that's not to say that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, if that tunnel led to a dead end, and that light was a poorly lit candle about to go out, but it's still a light.
Oh
to
my
look
god,
forward
that's
to
brilliant.
nonetheless. Only after their spirits are thoroughly broken are they offered anything that could be considered remotely as a reward for loyal obedience. It's offered to the whole collective of servants, all of the vampire brides. And it comes in the form of opportunities to feast on others and drink blood. Such rewards are often minor and offered sparingly. But in contrast to the torture that Shalltear normally subjects them to, it would seem like benevolent generosity and kindness of the highest degree. They become addicted to pursuing the rewards, as much as they fear and avoid the punishments. And just in case you didn't catch on, her abuse is of the not-safe-for-work kind, so her minions are slaves in more ways than one. It's implied that she and her many vampire brides routinely indulge in nightly activities. There's no doubt that she expects her servants to serve her in bed as much as they do outside of it. But a lot of this behavior wasn't in the anime at all.
No.
And it was only hinted at in the light novel. But we saw it much more clearly in the original source material, the web novel, available for free on a Japanese website that allowed users to write and share their own stories.
Oh.
The web novel was basically an early draft of Overlord, and there is quite a difference between the two versions. So much so, in fact, that the canons of the two series actually diverged from each other, and went into entirely different directions.
Cool.
The publisher of the light novel also probably restricted the author, Maruyama, from including subjects that were too risque or offensive in the official release.
Makes sense.
I point these two facts out because there's an entire arc involving Arsh, the female wizard from Foresight, and it was removed from the transition from web novel to light novel entirely.
Oh.
Needless to say, it heavily involved Shalltear. You see, web novels typically encourage more elements of fan interaction and participation. And so Maruyama had put up a poll during the worker invasion arc, asking fans whether Arsh should live or die. And they had ended up voting for her to live. This was apparently a disappointing result for Maruyama, since, unlike in the web novel, he would later write in the light novels that she was to die, hinting that he had preferred this outcome instead.
Right.
He wanted a grittier story, one that was less romantic, and one that didn't give cute girls plot armor. For every damsel like Soiree, rescued by a hero like Sibas, there should be a Ninya killed by Clementine, or an Arsh who died to Shalltear.
Yeah.
That's not to say that women couldn't be strong and competent, like we have Blue Rose or Enri.
Yeah.
But that also doesn't mean that they can't be weak and vulnerable. He felt that it was out of character for Ainz to spare Arsh, and ended up avoiding such polls in the future, when he realized how frustrated it made him to have
That's
to
the cool
take the
thing though,
story
like,
in a
innit?
different
It's like,
direction from
you
what
get a
he
second
intended.
chance at writing
Though
it,
at the
you
time
realise
of
what you
writing the
didn't
web
like in the
novel,
first
He
place.
had already ended up committing to sparing Arsh. So what happened was, Foresight had actually managed to negotiate with Ainz to ensure that Arsh's life would be spared, and Shalltear proceeded to ask to have her as a pet. Literally.
Oh god.
What we got instead of Arsh's swift, merciful death was Arsh's slow descent into being Shalltear's trained pet and sex slave. This, of course, included a collar, ears, and a tail.
Yeah?
You can use your imagination to figure out how that tail was properly secured to her body.
Oh no.
Ainz had told Shalltear not to hurt her,
Oh.
but for the most part, he didn't really care about her that much, so he had left her in Shalltear's care. Of course, Shalltear made sure to enjoy herself.
Oh my god.
There's actually a fairly lengthy excerpt from the web novel that goes into very vivid details of Arsh's experience as a pet. I'll link to that down below so you can read for yourself the cruel, unimaginable torture that Shalltear subjects to her minions. And don't forget, it could make you uncomfortable. In any case,
I ain't reading
through
that.
the twin pillars of punishment and reward, Shalltear molds her victims into her ideal slaves, toys, or pets. Once she is assured that they sufficiently fear her, she begins to grant them more freedom and initiative, opportunities to earn her favor and approval. serving her eventually becomes something that they enjoy, and a permanent part of their psychology, which, ironically, isn't even a necessary measure for a vampire. As I mentioned earlier, vampires are supposed to be able to turn their lesser vampires into obedient thrall, and Shalltear even demonstrates this ability during her operation in the kingdom. She turned one of the bandits into her slaves, so that she was then able to track down and locate their base. So, if she can control people that way, and her vampire brides are already her obedient servants, then why the disturbing abuse? Unfortunately though, I'm not going to answer that question in this video. I've decided to split the Who is Shalltear into 2 parts.
Oh, cool.
Simply due to how lengthy it is. We're really only halfway through, and I need to record this before I leave for vacation. So I truly apologize for the abrupt stop, but I do hope you're enjoying my recount of Shalltear's character. Anyway, before I go, feel free to check out the Bay merch in the description below. Unfortunately, there's no Shalltear design, but that's always a possibility.
Hell yeah.
Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time,
Ciao.
ciao.
That's cool, man. Shalltear's weird. Like, I already knew she was a bit weird anyway, but oh my god. She's super freak. Super freak. She's super freaky. Awesome. So, what I'll do is, the next one, when it comes around to doing another Annie News video, if he hasn't done the next Shalltear one, I'll do the Goblin Slayer cut content, because I do really enjoy those as well. I love all of Annie News' videos, my boss. So, yeah. Thank you guys very much for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys. It's all you guys next time.